airport was buzzing the way it always did in the late afternoon, voices blending together, wheels of suitcases rolling against the polished floor, and the constant chime of departure announcements echoing through the vast hall. For most people, it was routine. Another flight, another journey, but for Captain Daniel Hayes, every flight carried its own weight. As he walked briskly toward Gate 42, uniform crisp and cap tucked under his arm, his mind was already rehearsing the checklists, the procedures, the thousand little details that could never be overlooked. The aircraft waiting outside was a Boeing 737, shining under the fading sunlight. To the passengers, it was just a machine that would take them from one city to another. To him, it was a living, breathing responsibility. As he entered the jet bridge, his eyes, trained over years of flying, naturally scanned the line of passengers boarding. He didn't know why he did it. Habit, instinct, curiosity. But sometimes you could tell a lot about how a flight was going to go just by the people who stepped on board. There was the nervous businessman gripping his phone like it was an anchor, the family juggling restless kids and too many bags, the elderly couple walking slowly, holding hands. All ordinary, all expected. And then his eyes paused. She was different. A woman in her mid-30s, dressed simply, jeans, a light sweater, no flashy jewelry, no hurried expression. She walked with a steady rhythm, suitcase rolling smoothly beside her, as if the chaos of the terminal had nothing to do with her. When others glanced nervously at the plane through the windows, she didn't. She moved forward like someone who already knew exactly where she was going. Hayes didn't dwell on it. He nodded to the flight attendants, entered the cockpit, and buried himself in pre-flight checks. But somewhere in the back of his mind, the image of the calm woman lingered. The flight began like any other. The engines roared to life, the plane rolled down the runway, and within minutes, they were climbing through the clouds. The seatbelt sign switched off, flight attendants moved through the aisles, and the cabin filled with the usual rhythm of a journey settling in. Then, 35 minutes into the flight, the storm came. It wasn't on the forecast, at least not like this. The radar had shown light turbulence, maybe some shifting winds. Nothing serious. But now the aircraft trembled violently as lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the clouds like a war zone. The seatbelt sign chimed again. Passengers clutched their armrests, eyes darting toward the windows. Breaths quickening. Hayes and his co-pilot worked quickly in the cockpit, adjusting altitude, communicating with air traffic control, running through emergency procedures in their heads. The storm was worse than expected, and it was moving fast. In the cabin, fear spread like wildfire. Gasps, whispered prayers, even muffled cries, but not from her, from the corner of his eye. As Hayes briefly glanced through the cockpit door when a flight attendant came in, he saw her again, the same woman. She sat in seat 14A, right by the window, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if she were watching the storm rather than being trapped inside it. While others clung to their seats, she simply breathed. The lead flight attendant whispered to Hayes when she came in to check on the situation. "Everyone's panicking back there, except for one passenger. It's the strangest thing. She looks like she's in complete control." Hayes frowned but didn't respond. His focus had to stay on the plane, and yet, curiosity tugged at him. Another jolt rocked the aircraft, oxygen masks trembling above the seats. Gasps filled the air. Some passengers cried out. Hayes's hands were steady on the controls, but his heart rate spiked. Situations like this could spiral fast, and still, she didn't flinch. Her stillness began to ripple through the cabin. Passengers near her, who had been panicking, started watching her instead. There was something magnetic about her calm. The storm raged outside, but inside seat 14A, it was as if none of it had the power to reach her. Hayes didn't know why it bothered him, or fascinated him. Who was she? Why wasn't she afraid? And most importantly, what did she know that no one else did? The storm did not ease. For nearly 20 minutes, the aircraft shook and rattled, tossed around like a toy in the wind. Over the intercom, Captain Hayes tried to keep his voice even, his tone reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are in full control of the situation." But his words couldn't erase the tremors in people's hearts. Children cried, a man shouted angrily at the flight attendant, demanding answers no one could give, and somewhere near the back someone vomited into a paper bag. The cabin was descending into panic, except in row 14. The woman still sat quietly, her eyes closed now, as if the storm were just background noise. Her breathing was steady, her shoulders relaxed. She looked almost at peace. And then something strange began to happen. Passengers around her noticed. A mother holding a crying toddler leaned closer, watching the woman's slow breaths. Gradually, she started copying them, whispering to her child, and the toddler's sobs began to quiet. A businessman gripping his armrest with white knuckles shifted his gaze to her, and something about her steadiness seemed to loosen his own grip. Even the elderly couple across the aisle, who had been praying aloud, softened their voices, watching her as if she were anchoring them. Her calm was spreading. From the cockpit, Hayes kept glancing back whenever the door cracked open. His co-pilot focused on the instruments, muttering updates about altitude and wind shear, but Hayes's mind kept drifting. That woman, whoever she was, had become the quiet center of the storm. Another violent shake hit the plane, and a collective scream rippled through the passengers. The oxygen masks jiggled ominously. Hayes gritted his teeth, forcing his hands steady on the yoke. They were flying blind through a sky that wanted to tear them apart. But when he glanced back again, his eyes locked on her. She had opened her eyes now, staring calmly out at the storm-lit clouds. And then she smiled, just faintly, but unmistakably. It unnerved him. Why would anyone smile in a moment like this? Finally, when the storm began to thin and the worst seemed to pass, Hayes made a decision. As the plane leveled out, he turned to his co-pilot. "You have control. I'll be right back." Stepping into the cabin, he felt dozens of anxious eyes on him. A few passengers whispered, their fear still raw, but when he reached row 14, it was different. The air felt quieter there. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze directly, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "Rough flight," he said, his voice low. She tilted her head slightly. "Not the roughest." The answer sent a chill down his spine. "You weren't afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she replied simply. "Why?" He pressed. "Everyone else. They were terrified. But you..." For a moment her eyes softened, as though she were deciding how much to reveal. Then she said quietly, "When you've already lived through the worst day imaginable, storms don't scare you anymore." Hayes didn't move. Passengers nearby were pretending not to listen, but every ear was straining. "What happened?" he asked. She gave a faint smile, one touched with sadness. "I was on flight 327, the one that never made it to the runway." Hayes froze. He knew that flight. Everyone in aviation did. A crash years ago with only a handful of survivors. She had been one of them. "I learned something that day," she continued softly. "Panic doesn't save you. Fear doesn't stop what's coming. The only thing you can control is yourself. And sometimes the way you breathe is the only way to survive." The silence around her was heavy, every passenger hanging on her words. Hayes swallowed, feeling something shift inside him. He had spent his career believing control came from training, from procedures, from strict checklists. But looking at her now, he realized there was another kind of control, the kind that came from the heart. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded once, as if that was all that needed to be said. When the plane finally landed, passengers erupted in applause, relief pouring out of them. But the ones who had sat near row 14 carried something deeper than relief. They carried her calmness, her quiet strength, and as Hayes stood by the cockpit door, watching the passengers disembark, he saw her again, rolling her suitcase with that same steady rhythm, blending back into the crowd. No fuss, no recognition, just gone. But he would never forget her, because in the chaos of the storm, she had shown him what true calm looked like, and in the logbook of his memory, her presence would always remain, the mysterious passenger who reminded him that sometimes the strongest pilots weren't the ones in the cockpit.